All right. Welcome back to Site Selectors for People 2, the show that brings a personal touch to the world of site selection and economic development. As always, I'm your host, Devin Hillsdon-Smith, and this is the mini-series of Stories from the Road, where we interview professionals in the communities I visit during my travels. So today, I'm excited to announce that we're joined by Matt Marshall, economic developer for the Minnkota Power Cooperative, and the voice of economic development for North Dakota for anyone who will listen. Matt, how are you, man?
Wonderful. How are you doing, Devin?
I'm doing well. You know, the next part of this intro, usually I go through kind of your background and what you've done before, but you're an enigma. You are not findable online.
I am.
What's up with that? How do you survive without LinkedIn these days, man?
Everyone asks me that, and I get close all the time to jumping into the pool, and then I don't. It has not yet affected me. I get enormous grief about it from everyone. But have just maintained a no social media presence for quite a long time now. And now it's kind of a novelty. Everybody is like, what's wrong with you? And so I'm sure there'll be people listening to this and they're like, that guy's an idiot. And it's probably warranted in some cases, but hasn't.
I think you're the smartest man in the profession to not have any sort of socials.
Yeah, no, I got to a point. I mean, I used to years and years ago, was on, Twitter and Facebook, and I had a LinkedIn account, and about 8 years ago, sort of watched how people treated each other on Facebook and just made a conscious decision. I said, I'm just not going to be a part of this. I never really, to be fair, I never participated really anyway. I'd go on there every 2 months and watch people yell at each other, and I would think to myself, like, people would never speak this way if they're sitting in a room next to each other. And so since I am the product when I'm dealing with anything with social media, I just choose not to be the product anymore and shut the thing off. And I've never looked back.
It's an intentional decision. It's not like you're running from the feds or something. Is that accurate? Not that we know.
And at the time, and again, I don't think there's anything wrong with LinkedIn. And actually, people give me crap about it all the time. But it was during that time I was on LinkedIn and I had a lot of connections. I was like, that's it. I'm done with it all. And I shut it all off. And then my wife even gives me grief. She's like, you got to get back on there. And I go, It would be handy. It would be handy to engage with site selectors. That would be like the one thing that I want. But on the flip side, I also want real relationships. And so I want to be able to have conversations like this with you. I do see the value in maybe being able to ping a site selector over LinkedIn and say, hey, this is what's going on in our community. And it's quick and easy for them to scroll down. But I'm also blessed that, I work with a team. They all have that capability. And so, like, there's nothing new I'm going to say that Melissa's not going to put out on LinkedIn that you're not going to see either way. And therefore, I have a subsidy in that part of my life and I don't have to do it. So
there you go. Now, you touched on something there that I've talked about a lot on this podcast, which is building relationships in this industry, right? That's
real ones.
That's real ones. Exactly. And you differentiated there between having those relationships, right? I'm connected on LinkedIn versus actually knowing somebody. Right, which is why I semi-jokingly refer to you as the voice of economic development for North Dakota, because you seem to be so well connected, despite the fact that you're not doing things the same way that others are with LinkedIn and social media. So how do you go about in your daily work? How do you go about creating relationships, not only with site selectors and companies, but those folks that are within your service territory?
I think it takes a lot of effort that maybe not everybody's willing to put in, but you try and be intentional about being at places where people want you and need you, and not to miss the little things. So I spent a lot of time on the road, and then I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and call somebody or text them, and just check in and say, how are things going? Is there anything you need from us? Or, hey, I read about this. Is there anything I can do to support you? And so from a territory standpoint, that's sort of how we manage our shop here. And we talk a lot about just, again, real relationships so that, when you go into a community and you're representing a business and you said, hey, business, take time out of your life and go up and see this community. you don't have just a LinkedIn communication with them, or you don't have like a LinkedIn connection. You're walking in, you have a genuine relationship, and there's a trust factor there. And what ends up happening is those companies, they pick up on that, and they know that you know the good and the bad of the community, and that you're going to shoot them straight. And we've got a large territory. And so it takes a lot of work and time. And candidly, I don't have time for some of the social media stuff because I want the real thing.
Amen.
And so I spent a lot of time pushing that. And I had an older brother who's a sales guy, and I really look up to him a lot. And he said, one of the most important things you'll ever do is cultivate relationships. And so I've always just taken that advice and try and live that and do it my own way, which unfortunately takes a lot of time on the road. And again, it takes an intentional effort, but it's worth the time, in my opinion.
Well, and you have a huge service territory, right? We were just saying, Is it 3 counties in North Dakota and 8 in Minnesota? Do I have that right?
Oh, it's 3. Yeah, we have 3 cooperatives in North Dakota and 8 in, and so we've got, geez, I don't know how many thousands of square miles, but it's a big chunk of 2 states. So northeastern Minnesota, if you take basically the top 1/4 of that state, and then basically the north or eastern half of North Dakota, and sandwich those 2 together, that's the geographical territory that we serve. And so, yeah, it takes a lot to get out there. But again, it's, when you're on the road, you can make a phone call, and if you've built that relationship, you can really find out, what's going on. And we try and do that with, our local elected officials. We try and do that with our economic developers that we partner with. We try and do that with businesses that we've helped in the past. Just stay in touch and keep on track and figure out what's going on. And I think that is a big part of what helps sell the region, because we are a rural area. One of the things that we often talk about is, hey, if you're a business and you're used to dealing in a large metro area and you haven't quite explored what rural would be, and even though we serve the city of Fargo, which is the largest city in North Dakota, most of North America would consider that a rural area. You go out east, you say, hey, here's a city with a population of 250,000, and that's a small town. And right. So we spend a lot of time talking about the benefits of that. Like, you have access to your local elected officials. You just call them on the cell phone. You have access to the decision makers. So the cost of doing business can be much, much lower because you have the ability. Well, if I bring someone in and I'm reaching across the table, shaking their hands for the first time, be like, oh, I saw you on LinkedIn and loved your post. Like, that's not as authentic as being able to say, like, how are your kids doing? And what happened when you went fishing last weekend? And I heard you were in Arizona last week. They know there's a real connection there. And that is what it's like up here, but you have to be intentional about cultivating it.
I wonder if that's part of it, right? I mean, what you just basically described is up there in more rural America, there's more authenticity, right? In your engagements and interactions. Maybe you've just been conditioned to, like, this is the way that you get to know people, you build trust, you build relationships. And so why would I have this kind of screen relationship on LinkedIn, right? When I'm so used to, I can pick up the phone and call a local elected official because, everybody knows everybody and we know how to get something done, right? We know how to collaborate. But the way that you come about this, I mean, you sound like a lifelong economic developer. And I'm going to ask this not knowing, right? So how is this your head of economic development for Minnkota? Is this your first economic development role, or how did you get into it?
No, I'm like everybody else. This wasn't my life goal at all. So I'm not from the area originally. I'm from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area in Minnesota. And so I went to school and got a business degree, but actually went into electrical contracting for a long time out of school. And then got out of that and actually got exposed to economic development through a company called Golden Shovel Agency that maybe some people listening to this have heard of that company. And they're out of Minnesota, and they gave me an opportunity to be a part of their organization, and I'm grateful for that because it gave me a ton of exposure across the United States on how people approach economic development and what's working and what's not. And and when it came time for me to kind of essentially get off the road, my wife and I had our first child. I thought, well, maybe I could, be an economic developer, kind of like Golden Shovel Services. And so I ended up in West Fargo, North Dakota, as their local economic developer. And my wife and I had no connection up there. And I kind of sat down with her and said, here's something that would probably require a little less travel. Might be a little better fit for a family. Little did I know that wasn't exactly true, but at the time
Right.
it seemed
They got
at the
you.
time
We
it
got you.
seemed
We
like
sucked you
that
in.
was sound decision making.
Right.
And so we took the shot and came up here. And man, that was 2012, 13, somewhere in there. And then was economic developer there for 8 years. And then I ended up going into the utility space, worked for an investor owned. And then the opportunity came up here where they didn't have an economic development department yet. Lots of great people working on economic development, but it was like our COO also being the COO and trying to manage, economic development efforts, and our CEO. And so they said, we really want someone to sort of build this program, and our cooperatives have been asking for it. And you don't get too many opportunities like that in your life to really build something. And so, so we started from nothing.
You didn't just fall into it. You intentionally fell into economic development then. I mean, you kind of had a bite. You had a taste.
Yeah, I had people selling it. I mean, when I heard about it at first, they tried to explain it to me, and they'd be like, well, we do marketing and consulting for these people called economic developers, and they help place businesses and help them grow and expand. And I was like, I have no idea what you were talking about. And so, ended up going to, we went to my first conference with them, and then you kind of, it takes a couple to really wrap your head around it if you have no exposure to this, of which I didn't. But then, it's probably one of the most gratifying jobs you'll ever have in your life, especially when you have some success. And so,
why is that?
Well, one of my employees talks about it. You pour your life into these projects, and you sacrifice time with your kids and your wife, and I don't think people fully realize or appreciate the commitment it takes to have success doing this, and how much you're on call. And so you also know that you're working on the stuff that wouldn't naturally occur without this sort of effort. And it's not only us, it's a team, no matter what. But, we're working on the things that wouldn't naturally occur so that those naturally occurring growth things do start occurring. So in our world, it's everything from working with site selectors and marketing an area to try and land, hopefully a large expansion of some company. But we're also, because we serve rural, we're working on housing in very rural areas that there hasn't been a house built in 30 years, and we're trying to figure out how to make that go. And so in both those circumstances, you're working with your team of local stakeholders, and you're working, with your team in our office and your partner economic development agencies. And this whole effort is going to result in something that without that effort wasn't going to go. And then you get to watch the follow-on benefit that goes and have that satisfaction to say, I was a part of that. And Absolutely. You get a couple of those under your belt, and it's addicting.
Tangible results, right? Yep. You get to see your community growing because of your efforts, right? Yeah. That's something, haven't released it yet. It will be released before this episode, but my next episode of the full series, Site Selectors Are People Too, we're doing the life of an economic developer. Right. And that's part of it, right? Why would we want to do this type of work as economic developers when we constantly, it feels like, just constantly get the crap beat out of us, right? You're putting your blood, sweat, and tears into things. You're not hearing back. You're not getting the results that you want. You feel like you're fighting your own team as well as, externally, and you're just sitting there going, what am I doing? But then when you take a step back and look at the fact that you are in a position where you get to produce tangible results for your community, for your neighbors, for the families around you, there's nothing more powerful than that.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And you have to go through it to know and understand. And I think what the greatest compliment that I've ever had is seeing some huge projects and people forget that work and effort that went into it. And you hear them talk in a context like, well, it was always going to come. And I think some people would be furious about that. And I just love it. Like, I made it look so easy, or we as a team made it look so easy. You think it just came.
Right. You just stand up there, and of course they were going to come. I mean, this is where they're destined to be. Everybody,
and I get enormous satisfaction out of that. And it's basically like an election cycle or two. People don't know, what went into it, and the team, and the stress, and the sleepless nights, and again, it boils down to what you put into it, and how hard you work. And it's funny, when I go out and give presentations, a part of what I try and explain in certain areas is, what is economic development? And I have a funny story that's real. I've been doing this a really long time now. And, semi recently, my wife, we came to this realization as a married couple. My wife had no idea what I did for a living. And I finally asked her one time, I said, what is it? What do you think I do? And she kind of stumbled a little bit. And, we've been married a long time. So, she's like, well, you do this with real estate and then, sometimes you're lobbying and with elected officials to market the real estate somehow. And finally she sort of trailed out. She's looking at me, she's like, I don't know what you do. And, I've been doing this, well over a decade. And I'm like, it's fair. Because when she says, what'd you do today? I could be at the legislature. I could be flying to a part in the country to meet with someone like you. I could be working on a housing project. I work for a utility company, so that's confusing. So I might be talking about electrical rates. And to put that whole picture in your mind, it's like, what? I don't know.
Well,
he goes
like
out
asking,
the door.
what's the purpose of a Swiss Army knife?
Right. He goes out the door. He comes back in. Money shows up in our account somehow, some way. I don't really know what the hell he does. And so I always say it's the, what you're doing is you are solving the problems that are preventing naturalized growth. And
solving the problems that are preventing I like that, preventing naturalized growth.
Because, when you really think about a work plan, if a company comes to you and says, hey, we're fully financed, we're already in your community, we got all the employees that we need, we're just growing and we want you to know about it. You high five them and say, we'll be there at the ribbon cutting to support
Fantastic,
you.
we support you. Yep.
Yeah, we are grateful for your investment in our community. That's not what you're working on. You are working on the stuff where it's like, call Devin. Devin's got a large project. We're in a competition with, 12 other states and maybe 60 other communities, or some business that's like, what, I'd love to grow, but I don't have the financing to secure this machine that's going to open up 10 more jobs. Or I've got a machine now and I don't have 10 more jobs because there's no houses. Like, you're solving those root issues that are preventing the growth, the naturalized growth of that business, so you can pivot and go solve the other issue that's preventing naturalized growth. And that's really what economic development is these days. You have to be able to mobilize and go after those things that are preventing that growth, because it's so broad. It's not about just competing anymore. I mean, it's depending on the community you go into. I mean, the world's your oyster and the problems you want to have to work on.
Now, if you, like you said, you've done work at the local economic development organization level. Now you're at the utility side. And so my prior podcast about the life of an economic developer, I readily admit I focus in on the local economic developer, right? The quote unquote traditional economic developer side. So you say that you're solving problems, day in and day out. What's the difference for you, or how can you explain what do you do as an economic developer for utility as compared to maybe how I would have described, as we all recognize how local economic developers operate?
Yeah, I think we're a little unique. One, because both myself and the people, I have two others that work with me, we come out of local economic development. So we have maybe some of those skill sets where maybe some other utilities.
Oh, you all do?
Yeah. And so maybe some of the other utilities just have more of that business development side. So traditionally in utilities, oftentimes you will see, utilities sort of fall into that. We are the business development sort of arm, hand everything off to our local partners, and then, go and find the next one. And that's a great role. And candidly, when I got here, I expected maybe that would be.
That's what you thought it was going to be.
But because we serve such a rural area, I mean, we serve some what we consider metro areas, and I know you're in Indiana. So for those of you in Florida listening to this, our rural and your rural are two totally different things. Like we have actual rural areas. There's not much out there. And so,
well, I'll tell you what, you have a lot of land.
We have tons of land. Yep.
Tons of land, buddy.
We got tons of land. And energy. And so energy. we kind of take the approach where in the cases like you were up here in Grand Forks, North Dakota, you met with our Grand Forks EDC. We very much work as sort of a lead generation sort of arm of that organization, work very closely with them. Sometimes we'll consult on incentives if it's a particular type of incentive that maybe they haven't done a ton of, but maybe Melissa or I have done in a previous life. We can help manage some of that stuff. But we lean on them. They're our leaders. We're here in a supportive role. There's other areas we work where we're it. And we'll do everything from, doing community development projects for them. And so to, business development leads, to zoning. I mean, I wrote a urban renewal plan for a community one time because they didn't have anybody who could do it. So just sort of fill that gap to just move the ball down the field. That's kind of how I look at it. And when we as a team sit down, it's like, what do we need to do to get this from point A to point B? Let's fill that role, solve that problem, and move on. And if we can't do it, let's try and find someone that we know who can, and let's just get to the end. So you're
a team of 3.
Yep.
Right. And you covered, say, hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory.
Yeah. Yep.
And there are times when you are potentially backfilling for communities that don't have economic developers at times, helping to solve problems.
Absolutely.
How do you prioritize just the onslaught of requests and needs that hit your desk from day to day?
Not very well. No.
Honesty, it matters, people.
Yeah, that's a good question. How do you prioritize?
And I'll tell you, I don't know the answer, right? Prioritization is a very difficult factor.
I mean, without a doubt, it's the hottest flame. I mean, I think anybody in economic development would say you're putting out fires, but we try and take an approach like you have sort of the project-based sort of schedules where, we've got a request, we got to get information back. We might be the one going, I mean, very often we're the ones out, pounding on doors, asking if land can be marketed for sale. I mean, that's one of the things that we do. We take a very pragmatic approach to economic development. And so in some areas, we have an abundance of land, but none of it's marketed right now in some of our areas. And so we call them and say, hey, can we market this land for sale? And here are the parameters that we'll use. And so we have sort of these like long-term projects that we're putting together, building inventory, that sort of thing. And then we've got the stuff that you're putting out fires, and then, and then you get requests for help and they'll give you a deadline. And so it's just, it's like managing to be it's judicious. Like a ebb and flow. Yeah. You have to stay on it, and you got to be willing. I think you got to be willing to do stuff. And this is all economic developers will tell you that other people aren't willing to do. So, drop everything and drive, 2.5 hours for a Tuesday night meeting. And most people, would be like, well, it's not during 9 to 5, so we can't do that. And that's not every economic developer that you talk to, I'm sure, is just not cut from that cloth if they've been doing it for a while.
I think one thing that is a common thread amongst all of us in both economic development and site selections that we all have trouble saying no.
Yeah.
But we need to be a lot better at it.
Yeah.
Right?
There's some truth to that.
We need to be so much better at saying no, so we can focus ourselves in on those items that matter. But you know what? Every item, I don't care if it's, you have a multi-billion-dollar project looking at your territory, or you've got, Joe Schmo and two men in a forklift incorporated, right? They're getting ready to expand. They come in and they want you there for the ribbon cutting, right? Everything matters to somebody.
Yep.
Right. And so it's very hard to say no, especially in the position that we're in, right? Because you know that if you say no to somebody in a smaller community, there might not be somebody else there to backfill and help them out.
Yeah. Well, and you're exactly right. And the other thing that I think people maybe on the outside don't understand is just the amount of time everything takes. Because a lot of time, you're not, if you're a local economic developer or you're an economic developer like, Melissa and Lisa and I, you're not making the decisions for the community. And so here you've got project X, whether that's a new build or it's a housing project or Lord knows what it could be. You then are going to that community and you have to convince them on behalf of themselves to feel okay about it, to move the ball forward, and then help educate them so that they can then inform their constituents. And that timeline, the amount of hours that takes to achieve that, people just don't understand the investment of time it takes to, one, build the trust with your local electeds or the final decision makers. It could be a county, it could be a city, could be a school in some cases, it could be a state, it could be some other agency. And the best way to really advance those is to have that trust and relationship with those people so that when you walk in and help them understand what you're representing or what this business or project is bringing to their community, they feel good about it. They know the person that's sitting across the table is going to shoot them straight and give them the pitfalls that could happen as a result, so that they can then go explain it. And there's no email that does that. There's no text message. There's no
LinkedIn message.
This goes back to LinkedIn, like, hey, I know you on LinkedIn, so I'll show up. And of course you'll be okay with this. Like, that does not exist.
No.
That is built over not only time before the project, but then while the project going on, the amount of hours you're helping people get through things. On our end, we have, some incentives at Minnkota through economic development rates. And then our cooperatives, they have access to the red leg loans. And then some of them have some like individualized programs. But other than that, like, you get a small company that's not, energy isn't their main driver.
There's not much.
We're working through other decision makers, and that, like you said, whether it's a $1 billion project or a $1 million project, it almost seems like the time it takes is exactly the same.
Interesting. And so there's a return on investment calculation you have to do in your head, right? And or maybe you don't. I mean, maybe you're just going, hey, it's still critical. This project.
Yeah, well, it's regional impact too. I mean, so it's return on investment, but then also it's just, I could look at a $1 million project that's going to have extraordinary impact for that region, and a $50 million project in a larger metro area that isn't a big deal, but is not
relative, right?
Not going to do as much. And so you have to, as projects sort of like start and stop a lot of times. I really believe a lot in, pushing the projects that are moving, and then, I'll go back and try and get the other projects going to the extent you can. But, we're generally, prioritizing those projects that are moving and then hitting those deadlines based on, we're going to get this one to the end. And as long as you have a large enough pipeline, there's always something to work on.
And you're doing what, I've said before, the projects that I bring, yes, they're game changing for communities, but if a community can't take care of the small businesses, right, its own ecosystem first, you're not going to be able to handle the bigger project, right? And so I think that's exactly what you're talking about. You're making sure that your ecosystem is healthy. So we're going to head to break real quick. And when we come back, we will be joined again by Matt Marshall and we'll be talking about his economic development team at Minnkota Power Cooperative. See you in a sec. And we're back with Matt Marshall at the Minnkota Power Cooperative in the Economic Development Department. So to that point, right, your team at Minnkota Economic Development it's pretty new, right?
Yeah, relatively. Yep.
When was it formed?
I came here February 2020. It was just me to start with. So
you were the first one. The team's now expanded to 3.
Yep.
What does that look like for you? And help us maybe understand Minnkota's economic development arm, right? So what does your team, you've kind of gone over what your focuses are, right? But what do you envision for the future of your team and how you help to bring in new companies and support your existing communities?
Yeah. Well, let me unpack that a little bit. So my role here is actually member services, rates, and economic development manager. So I've taken on some other parts of economic development as well. But then, as our team continues to grow, well, what I'd like to see is us to continue to grow and work with our 11 member cooperatives and 12 municipal systems. That's where the power is. Melissa and myself and Lisa and my boss Lowell, we're our small team of economic developers. But, we can really expand that growth throughout our Minnkota family, which includes both the member cooperatives, which touch, huge geographic areas, as well as our cities and municipal systems that, also have high populations plus businesses. And so what we're going to try and do is grow our program to mentor those. And so what we want to continue to do over the next 5 years is take this effort and continue to grow it, but then leverage the might of our Minnkota family, which they're all amazing, and get them so that they're educated and we can just continue to multiply our efforts. I think that's the most efficient way, and that's the way we can touch this huge geographic area. And like I said, I have no doubt we're going to continue to get there because we've got this great family. I didn't know this when I got here, but apparently sometimes we're a generation transmission entity, and then this model is throughout the country. And from time to time, the generation transmission folks and the distribution electric cooperatives don't always get along. I always just thought it was like we have all the time, where everybody gets along and they're awesome. And so it was funny to hear, sometimes I hear my boss and our CEO talk a little bit, and they're like, it's not always this way.
No, it's not, man.
Sometimes they argue, and it's like, oh, really? So I came into a time where everybody's, and so as we look at our sort of strategic plan and look forward, it's continuing to work with our member cooperatives and educate them, find places where they can get into the community and get engaged and be impactful. And then what we can do is we can help guide and direct that, and then come in, and we're multiplying ourselves through our member cooperative family. And man, they've embraced that, all of them, and they're just extraordinary partners for us. And so we just want to continue to build that.
What's that look like? So for those that are not familiar with areas where utilities are, kind of separated throughout the stream, right? So your generation transmission, and then your locals, your members are distribution.
Yep.
Right. So what's that look like structure wise when a project is looking at a territory, right? Who are they dealing with, and how are they navigating that separation there? You said it's pretty seamless, but there's in the structure itself, there's got to be, an impact to projects looking.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So if a project's looking in our territory, sometimes they come through us, and sometimes they will come through our member cooperative. I mean, it's pretty balanced, actually. Our member cooperatives, they are our retail holders, and our NMPA communities as well, but they are the retail holders. So everything we're doing is on behalf of them. And so, and it's on behalf of our Minnkota family, we call it. So we are the generation transmission entity. We have those 11 member cooperatives, as I mentioned, but we also have NMPA communities, 12 of them, that they're municipal systems as well. And so, we come in as a supportive department for them. And so when a project's looking, sometimes they start with us because they'll say, hey, we're looking for this land. We don't know if we're going to be in Minnesota or North Dakota. What do you got that meets these requirements? Then we try and help narrow it down. But then as that project moves along, the retail provider will be one of those member cooperatives or municipal systems. And then we're working on behalf of them at that point in time. And so it's very collaborative. I mean, it's like doing business in northwestern Minnesota or North Dakota. Like, everybody knows each other. We're all a team. We work very, very well together. We will submit information together. So just this week, we have a large project. One of our member cooperatives got asked a list of questions. Our team worked on it with them and submitted the information for them underneath their brand, so that we're all working on it together, but ultimately it would be their retail holder or member, I guess I should say.
So you have a large project looking right now at one of your areas. So let's transition that to what is it? So I would assume, and maybe there isn't, I would assume there's a site selector involved. What is something that you would want site selectors to know about your territory? Let's focus on North Dakota, because that's where I was. When I get out to Minnesota, I'll do that side, right? So what's something you want site selectors and folks around the country to know about your North Dakotan side of your territory?
Well, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't get to say we are so fortunate to be able to serve two great states with great opportunities on both sides of the states, or both states that we serve in. So I want to start there and acknowledge that we have Minnesota. But since you asked about North Dakota specifically, so first and foremost, access to capital. We have the only state-owned bank in the nation. Most people don't know that. So if you've got a project that needs financing support, especially in these high interest levels, we can't be beat across the nation. We're the only state-owned bank specifically formed for the purposes of economic development.
Sorry, that sounded like you said if you're looking for high interest levels. You meant in an environment of high interest levels.
In an environment of high interest rates, if there are projects that need financing support, or even if projects are not looking, they're just looking for a cheaper opportunity to find capital. We have that available. In addition to that, we have a large legacy fund. So in North Dakota, we produce a lot of oil, as most people know. And rather than, some states take that oil earnings and they cut checks to, their constituents. I mean, I'm a North Dakota resident. Sometimes that would be awesome. But what's equally awesome is they took that money and they built what's called the legacy fund. And they just pack that away, and they take earnings off that legacy fund and they use that to invest in projects. And so we have that available as well. So those are two large opportunities on the financing side of things. The other thing is we have land, we have energy. We're in a state that I don't think people fully appreciate the access to decision makers. We joke all the time that we're in larger areas, and people will ask, well, how long is it going to take to permit something? And be like, well, I'll just call and ask right now. And all the way on up to the governor's office. And that's not to say, hey, I spent the first part of this podcast, talking about networks and relationships. That is truly how things get done. People just expect to be able to talk to you. When I first moved up here, I joke all the time. You'd sit down with somebody and they'd be like, oh, Marshall, are you related to so-and-so Marshall and wherever? No, I'm not. I don't have any family here, never been here. And they'd be, oh, do you know the Marshalls and so-and-so? Nope, I don't know that. It's almost like they need to validate that you're really human or something.
Yeah, that you belong.
but now I find myself doing that. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that's what's truly powerful. So if you're a site selector and you've got a business and they're like, we need to talk to the decision makers, who's going to permit, how are we going to get this in the ground as fast as humanly possible? We will have them all around a table within a matter of days, from the governor's office all the way down. And they will be there in the room with you when you show up. And you can't do that in other states. There's these layers of bureaucracy and people are often just flabbergasted at how fast we can turn that around. People will walk out of the room with a decision. And that's stuff that you can do in smaller states that, I didn't fully appreciate when I moved here, but now that I've been doing this a long time, that is truly special. Everything else, I mean, workforce wise, we've got a, extraordinary workforce that works really hard. We also, like everyone else, struggle to have a lot of workers. So you're going to come here and fight just like everybody else does all over the country. But when you get them, they'll be great. So we're really proud of that. Highly educated, one of the highest labor participation rates in the country. And so
one of the highest labor participation rates in the country.
Yeah.
That's a huge statistic.
I think we're number 2 or number 3. It's just down in Bismarck and the Fed brought that out.
The Fed actually had something interesting to say. Okay.
Yeah. Federal Reserve was there. So if I had a better memory, if I wasn't so old, Devin, I'd remember that exactly. It's 2 or 3, somewhere in there.
Hey man, your top 5. That's important. That's important.
Yeah. So those are then, land just like everywhere else. I mean, it's a mishmash across our territory of, we've got sites in some areas, other areas you got to develop them. But generally speaking, the truly unique stuff, which I think site selectors need to know, because everyone's going to tell a site selector, we got a great quality of life, which we do. But the truly unique stuff has to do with that financing, access decision makers, great labor when we, if you got a great product, you're gonna attract, if you're a company, you're gonna attract workers if you treat them well. That's what we see. And so, yeah. And you'll have a state that supports business. That's the other thing. Like,
amen.
We got a governor that is a former business owner, entrepreneur. Both gubernatorial candidates are huge pro-business governors that are going to want to sit down with you. And so no matter who wins, we kind of win in that category as well. And then a regulatory environment that's really manageable to get through, because you can just call people and ask. Like, if you're going through something, it's not uncommon to just say, hey, I don't really understand this. And so we can get to the end of a process a lot faster than lots of other states.
It's the folks think of rural farm life as neighbors are there to help, right? If somebody's piece of equipment goes down, right, and they really need some help, you can get your neighbors to rally around it and help get it fixed, so you can back up and running, right? The old, if you need a cup of milk, it's not weird or embarrassing to go next door and ask for some help, right? Whereas maybe in some areas, like in Indianapolis, where I live, you feel a little awkward going across the street and saying, hey, I'm sorry, like my generator broke down. Is there a chance you can? But what you're saying is you've even got that at the corporate level, right? At the decision making, the leadership level, right? It's not just about person to person. It's literally, if you're looking to invest $500 million in, one of our communities, we don't care that we're talking corporate speak here and there's all this on the line. You're going to get the same reception as if you were the neighbor down the street who ran out of something and you just need some help and you can walk down the street, no questions asked. We're going to help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. The ecosystem here is second to none. And that's a great way to put it, is it's like neighbors helping neighbors. And, we've got, like I said, we have, that's just the way business has been built here, with that expectation. And so people are just crazy collaborative and help each other out. And that's what I hear when companies have come here. That's what has surprised them, is just, man, the support you get here, and the opportunities are just never ending, because people kind of rally around you and will provide that support to you.
Bingo.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. But before we do, we have a portion of this this mini series that we always end on. You can either tell me your best fun fact, it can be about yourself or just a general fun fact, or you can tell me your best appropriate joke.
Oh, golly. I don't have any good fun facts. Let me think of an appropriate joke. My father's a jokester, but I don't know that I can roll any of those bad boys out on.
So you can always tell me an inappropriate
podcast.
joke, and we can cut it if we need to.
No, fun fact. My wife and I, my wife is an avid runner, and so we'll be married 19 years this fall, and so this goes back a ways. And so way back when I was like, this lady's pretty good looking, I want to get to know her, and we were first married, I used to run with her, a sport and an activity I do not like at all. I hate it.
You and me both.
And so for a while, she likes to run, and she runs, different marathons and 5Ks and 10Ks. And I used to do that so that I could do something that she really enjoyed, until she beat me like 8 months pregnant.
Ooh.
Which was one of my ultimate low points in life. And I looked at her and I go, I'm done with this forever.
And that's when you hung up the shoes.
Yeah, that was my last time. And now it's like, if I have to run, something's chasing me. My kids want to play in a game. Maybe I'll run a little for that. But that was the last straw. Like, we're married now. You're not going anywhere. You just beat me 8 months pregnant, which makes me feel like I'm 2 feet tall. So I'm done forever. So that's my fun fact about me.
Fact.
My wife
embarrassing fun fact.
Kick my butt when she runs, and I like to tell people not a good runner, it turns out.
Very good. Well, I'll tell you that the last time I tried to run, I made it about 3/4 of a mile down the canal in downtown Indianapolis, threw up in the base, and walked back and said never again.
Yeah.
And I was not hungover. I was sober as can be. Had not had anything to drink the night before. So that's how running to me go. I'm a hiker, and that's basically what I do. So
yeah.
Good deal.
I have not complimented you yet on your sign back there.
Oh yeah.
Your Bushwood sign.
Yeah, you see that?
I absolutely love it.
Original Chevy Chase signature on there as well.
Oh, no way. I did not see that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'll have to post a picture of it in the podcast description. That end, is it okay if anybody wants to be able to reach out, talk more about North Dakota, Minnesota, Minnkota? Mind if I put your email into the description? Now I know that's getting close to social media there, man.
No,
I wanted to make sure I asked.
Actually have them text me 701-630-4658. Like, I don't mind. Just give me a call.
What's your social?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you that.
You're not going to do that. Okay. Well,
yeah.
Genuine yet smart up there in North Dakota. So
yeah,
genuine and smart. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, hey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for sharing your insights. I'll tell you that, I had never been to North Dakota until I came up for the conference. And as you know, I've now got a project looking at your territory. I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I think it is a fantastic state the more folks need to know about. I think you are a champion of economic development, Mr. Marshall, and I mean that sincerely. So thank you again for sharing your insights, all the exciting developments going on in your community. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Stories from the Road. Join us next time on Site Selectors for People Too, as we continue to humanize the industry and uncover the stories that shape our communities. See ya.
Hey, thanks a lot, Devin.
Thanks, bud.
Just a heads up, views expressed in this podcast are solely my own and are not attributable to any employers, whether past or present. Thank you.